Hey, Frog Prince Rana here, and thank you for dropping by. A claim is going around regarding the US election is the probability of former Vice President Biden winning the popular vote in the 4 defendant states, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, independently given President Trump's early lead on those states as of 3 a.m. on November 4, is less than 1 in a quadrillion, or 1 in 1 followed by 15 zeros. This calculation was done by Charles J. Cicchetti. This claim, 1 in a quadrillion chance, spread widely on Facebook after the December 8th lawsuit. White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany repeated the claim that day, as did articles on various conservative websites.
That's right. You're pointing out the anomalies that happened in this election because this was a never-before-tried type of election with the mail-in voting. And what this lawsuit does, it looks at those anomalies, and here's what it finds. It finds that the chances of Biden coming from as far behind as he was at 3 a.m. on election night, the chances of that are 1 in 1 quadrillion. The chances of him, that's prevailing in one state, prevailing in all 4 of the states where he was so far behind, the chances of that are 1 in a quadrillion to the 4th power. This is all outlined right here in this lawsuit, everything we've discussed in a source document by attorneys before the United States Supreme Court.
As proof, the lawsuit attached a declaration from Cicchetti presenting his justification for this claim, describing his hypothesis testing and calculation of z-scores and p-values. I'll try to keep this video as simple as I possibly can, but there are some definitions we need to go through first. We have null hypothesis. It is a type of hypothesis used in statistics that proposes that there is no difference between certain characteristics of a population or data generating process. The null hypothesis states there is no relationship between the measured phenomena, the dependent variable, and the independent variable. A simple example would be the question, are teens better at math than adults? With the null hypothesis being, age has no effect on mathematical ability. Then we have z-score. It is a statistical measurement of a score's relationship to the mean in a group of scores. A z-score can reveal to a trader if a value is typical for a specified dataset or if it is atypical. Suppose a bunch of people take an IQ test and I scored 5. Is that good or bad? There is no way of confirming either way without knowing how people typically score on this test. But if my score corresponds to a z-score of 0.95, one can say it was quite good. It is roughly a standard deviation higher than the average, which is always 0 for z-scores. Then p-value, that is a probability. For the pattern analysis tools, it is the probability that the observed spatial pattern was created by some random process. When the p-value is very small, it means it is very unlikely that the observed spatial pattern is the result of random processes, so we can reject the null hypothesis. I have linked the documents in the description below, but I will just address 2 points in this document, that is, declaration by Cicchetti. It was a pain to find it, as it happens to be in a 170-page document where the Cicchetti declaration was an image, so not searchable. I found a link, also in description, that had already converted the required pages from images to text and made it easier to copy and paste. First issue I would like to address. Well, to be honest, this is again repeated for the other 3 states. But Georgia being the first in list, we're looking at that. In paragraph 10, it mentions, in 2016, Trump won Georgia with 51% of the vote compared to Clinton's 45.9%, with more than 211,000 votes separating them. In 2016, Clinton received 1,877,963 votes, and Trump received 2,089,104 votes. In 2020, Biden's tabulated votes, 2,474,507, were much greater than Clinton's in 2016. Trump's vote also increased to 2,461,837. The Biden and Trump percentage of the tabulation were 49.5% and 49.3% respectively. The hypothesis that Cicchetti testing that the performance of the two Democrat candidates, Clinton and Biden, were statistically similar, and that other things being the same, they would have received an equal number of votes. As this shows, the two performances are not statistically similar. This null hypothesis is extremely easy to reject. Simply being, if we expect the votes to have the same distribution of preferences, then there is no point of having an election every 4 years. People do change their preferences, alliances over time. Especially, the last 4 years have been rather divisive. It created a lot of discord, not only for the people in USA, but also around the world. In fact, I can't recall any other president in USA that caused this much stir. Even if that was not the case, one can't still presume that it would be statistically similar to one election year to another. The first true single-party president, that is ignoring John Adams, who was a Federalist, would be the seventh president, Andrew Jackson, who was Democratic. For Cichetti's null hypothesis to be true, every other president should have also been a Democrat. With the initial presumption being wrong, the Z-score wouldn't even come into play. Cicchetti does add, there are many possible reasons why people vote for different candidates. However, I find the increase of Biden over Clinton is statistically incredible if the outcomes were based on similar populations of voters supporting the two Democrat candidates. Again, this is assuming the same null hypothesis. Followed by in paragraph 14 and 15, we get, at 3:10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, on November 4th, the Georgia reported tabulations were 51.09% for Trump and 48.91% for Biden, eliminating third-party candidates. The total votes reported for the two major candidates were 4,662,328. On November 18th, at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the reported percentages were Trump 49.86% and Biden at 50.14%. The Biden advantage over Trump in the final tabulation reported was less than 14,000 votes or 0.28%. For this turnaround to occur, the subsequent addition late ballots totaling 268,204 votes had to split 71.6% for Biden and 28.4% for Trump. The two periods report shifts in the percentage favoring Trump from 51.09% to 49.86%, which is a percentage difference of 1.23%. The Georgia reversal in the outcome raises question because the votes tabulated in the two time periods could not be random samples from the same population of all votes cast. I use a Z-score to test if the votes from the two samples are statistically similar. I estimate a Z-score. The estimated confidence is actually about 1 in 1 with 2,568 zeros. So rephrasing it, if the 2020 voting population had precisely the same party preference as the 2016 voting population, Biden could not have possibly won. And if the mail-in and in-person voters had precisely the same party preference, Trump should have won. Let me give you an example. Suppose I go to my local school playground, not advisable, and then I ask the students, what is the answer to 8 times 9? I might get a chorus of gaga if it happens to be kindergarteners who has that playtime slot, and we also get 100% of the students unable to answer the question. Then, if I go back in couple of hours, when I have older students in the same playground, my same question would get a lot more correct answers. At a good school, I would be disappointed if the correct answer was less than 90%. So what happened? I went to the same school playground. First I got 0% correct. Couple of hours later I got 90%. Was there any fraud involved? Did I get wrong data? Of course not. Obviously you would point out that though I was technically asking the same population, i.e. students in the same school, those are not really comparable. Statistical calculations are only as good as the assumptions underpinning them, and Cicchetti's assumptions are completely wrong. He makes the same error in multiple ways, assuming any two large groups of voters would generate substantially similar results. But groups can split drastically by geography. In Wisconsin, for example, Milwaukee County and Waukesha County are next to each other, but one went 69% for Biden and the other 55% for Trump because demographics in these two counties are very different. How does my school analogy fit with the election? Well, we had one party that kept advising all its supporters to vote in person, while the other party kept saying that there is a global pandemic going on that has killed millions of people around the globe. Even in USA, over 315,000 people had died. So is it any surprise that we would have more representation of the red team during the initial count when the voters were in person? Thus, it is wrong to assume votes are all independently and randomly distributed. According to the US Election Project, across the 20 states that reports votes by party registration, when it came to in-person voting, Republicans led by a 42% to 36% in November's election, while Democrats had a 48% to 27% edge in mail-in balloting. These values are ignoring listing with no affiliation. Some even urged Dr. Cicchetti to redo his analysis, but instead of comparing Biden's performance to Clinton's, he should compare Mitt Romney's performance in 2012 to Donald Trump's in 2016. Given voters' 2012 preferences, this would also prove conclusively that Donald Trump could not have possibly carried Pennsylvania or Michigan or Wisconsin. It would be won in a quadrillion. Well, hopefully I managed to explain why that figure and assumption is completely wrong. Here is where I'll end this video. If you have enjoyed it, please give it a like, comment, and maybe share it around. This channel is mostly focused on debunking junk science. If you're into those kind of things, please look around and perhaps consider subscribing. It would be highly appreciated. Thank you so much for watching. Wherever you are, have a safe day. Signing off.